Welcome to review capsule number 2 for History Sec 4. Reminder that things are going to go quick, so please pause, analyze the documents, and rewatch anything you need a little more time with. So we start with the move towards Confederation. So Canada was facing a lot of political and economic challenges after the UK abandoned its protectionist policies. And to address these issues, a growing number of Canadian leaders started to advocate for a union of the colonies. So this was Confederation, and the idea was to unite Canada to help solve their economic and political issues. So I would pause at document 13 to take note of what constitutes the province of Canada and what the British colonies' possessions were at the time. So around the 1850s, the British North America had various territories. You can see Rupert's Land, which belonged to the Hudson Bay Company, Newfoundland, Prince Edward Island, New Brunswick were all colonies. All were subject to British control, and they were unable to have any control over their external affairs. So politically, there was a lot of political issues that occurred in the 1850s following the end of the Reform Alliance between Baldwin and LaFontaine. So what happened was that we see the creation of a two-party system. These are the Conservatives and the Liberals, and they will become the main players in the political landscape. I would pause at document 14 to take a look at the difference between the Conservatives and the Liberals and who their leaders were. So the political issue that Canada was facing at the time was ministerial instability. This was hindering their ability to really get any change to happen politically. It led to a lack of action and a lack of development for the province of Canada. They were unable to get a double majority and therefore could not make many changes. So here's a good time to pause and to study the key terms there in blue. So there was a push by the leader of the Clear Grits Party, George Brown, towards proportional representation. So this was very convenient for him at the time, considering that at the time Upper Canada's population had now surpassed Lower Canada's. Therefore, George Brown advocated for representation by population, and this was to assimilate the French Canadians. And obviously, Lower Canada was opposed to this. So basically, it meant that if you had a greater population, you would be able to have more influence politically. Document 16, notice the change. This is important to note because remember, under the Act of Union, Lower Canada had the greater population, and now Upper Canada has the greater population. So economically, Canada faced a lot of challenges after the abandonment of British protectionism, and it had to shift towards free trade. And they were forced to compete globally, and therefore were looking for a new trading partner. So Canada decided to form a treaty with the United States. It was a close neighbor, and they decided that they could trade raw materials and agricultural products, finished products, without taxes. So this was a 10-year agreement that facilitated trade between Canada and the United States. It helped boost the economy. And Canada could sell to the Americans without paying custom duties or tariffs. So you can see here in document 4 and 5, they're talking about it's referring to the reciprocity treaty with the United States. You can see in document 4 that exports from the province of Canada to the United States increased exponentially over the 10 years that this agreement was in place. So again, good time to pause the video and take a closer look. Okay, so the proposal to form a union of all the colonies. Why? Well, Canada's goal was to strengthen their domestic market. They wanted to avoid complete dependency on the United States, and they wanted to increase trade among each other between the colonies. To boost the economy and unite the colonies, the expansion of the railway network was necessary. So in 1852, the Grand Trunk Railway Company was founded, and this would be a rail network that would be able to connect the colonies and allow the colonies to trade goods between each other. So here you see in document 19, the development of the railway and how it was able to connect the colonies and facilitate trade. So meanwhile, in the United States, they were grappling with the American Civil War. And this presented an issue for Canada because they were afraid of annexation. So they were afraid of an American invasion. The Americans were eyeing the west of Canada. And so Canada was afraid of being invaded and therefore thought, let's unite our colonies to protect ourselves from an American invasion. Good time to pause here, and this is for the American Civil War. Moving on. So by 1866, the Reciprocity Treaty had ended, and Canada was again looking for a new trading partner. So why not trade among themselves? This helped with the idea of confederation because the colonies were looking at each other as, a way to unite and help each other with their colonies. So the Great Coalition was another alliance that gained momentum as a way to secure autonomy from Britain. Document 21, you can see who are the members of the Great Coalition who are proposing the idea of confederation, who are proposing the idea of uniting the British North American colonies. So not everyone was for confederation. It faced a great deal of skepticism, specifically from the maritime provinces and Newfoundland. They feared that they would have to take on the debts of the other colonies, and they were also afraid of representation. They were afraid of being assimilated. They were afraid of sharing their resources. So not every colony was for confederation. However, after several conferences, the Dominion of Canada was officially established in 1867 with John A. Macdonald as the first Prime Minister of Canada. Document 23 are the conferences which were the steps towards confederation, and it's important to note what order they are in. So noting the chronology of these events is very important. Document 22 is another conference. This was the first conference. Then this was followed by the Quebec Conference, where they drafted 72 resolutions, and it ended with the London Conference, which was where Confederation was officially adopted. Okay, one moment. So Canada did gain autonomy. However, the ultimate authority was still for Britain, especially in foreign policy matters, and Canada was not able to make changes to their constitution without the permission of Britain. So this was not fully democratic or autonomous for Canada. So this is what the new government of Canada looks like in 1867, following the BNA Act. It established a federal and a provincial government. So this is what we know as Canada Day. July 1st, 1867 was the signing of the British North America Act, which created the Dominion of Canada. So there's your summary for part 2. Take a pause there, and we're moving on to practice questions shortly. Okay, practice questions. So, what political issue is George Brown making reference to in document 17? Pause the video. George Brown is referencing ministerial instability. This is where they were having issues achieving a double majority, and therefore politically not much change was occurring. There was too much division between the political parties. Okay, consult document 8 and 9 and indicate the subject on which the authors of the text disagree. So pause the video. And the answer is they disagree on the idea of confederation. So document 8, we know that Newfoundland was opposed to confederation. And in document 9, Cartier is for confederation. Why is Dorion opposed to confederation? So read document 27. Okay, so it's difficult to understand, but what Dorion is talking about is the fear of the federal government taking over too much control and not leaving enough autonomy for provincial government. So specifically, a government like in Quebec, the concern by Dorion would be the assimilation of the French. So the loss of the French language and culture, and therefore Dorion is opposed to confederation. So what is the territorial change? There's 2 documents there. And if you look closely at the bottom document, you can see that this is 1867 when the BNA Act created the Dominion of Canada. And you can see the first 4 provinces are Ontario, Quebec, New Brunswick, and Nova Scotia. That is the territorial change. Which conference included the drafting of the 72 resolutions? So if you look at document 22, you have to really look at the text on the side. And the answer is the Quebec Conference. So it says following the Charlottetown Conference. They met in Quebec, and at the end of the second conference, so in Quebec, they drafted the 72 resolutions. And there's the full document. The text was cut off on the other slide. And that's it. That is your conclusion of capsule number 2.